From London, I'm John Weeks, and this is The Standard. Coming up in part 2 today, why Dryrobes have taken over London with The Standard's Elle Hunt. But first, the Evening Standard has launched a new campaign to tackle violence against girls in the capital. It's called the Show Respect campaign, and it'll use £500,000 to fund workshops about healthy relationships in London schools. They're run by groups and charities, including Youth Realities, Action Break Silence, UK Feminista, and Tender, who held a recent workshop at St Mary Magdalene Church of England School in Greenwich.
That's kind of like a manipulative way to that question.
It is, and I really hear you, because what you're identifying there is that there's different types. There's a pressure that makes you feel scared.
Just last week, our investigation into violence against girls found that sexual harassment is a daily occurrence for many girls. Rating girls and posting on social media has become normalised, and boys as young as 8 access pornography. However, this new initiative aims to reach 15,000 Year 9 students aged 13 and 14 across London. And the Standard is calling on whoever forms the new government, as well as corporates, foundations and philanthropists, to back us so that we can expand the campaign even further. Joining me now is our campaigns editor, David Cohen, who's been leading the initiative. So David, can you just start off by telling us really what is the aim of this new Show Respect campaign?
So we started looking into violence against women and girls last year, and we approached the violence reduction guru, if you like, the guy appointed by the government to look into this and to look into the evidence as to what works. And this is John Yates, who heads up the Youth Endowment Fund. The government 5 years ago gave him £200 million to spend over 10 years to look at what works. What we are doing today is that we are following the evidence and announcing a new campaign called Show Respect that will follow the evidence, as I say, and help tackle violence against girls in schools. And what we are doing, we're putting £500,000 from the Evening Standard Dispossessed Fund into healthy relationships workshops in schools. We're hoping to reach an additional 15,000 students. We're funding 12 charities that will go into schools from September, reach 15,000 Year 9, that's 13 and 14-year-olds, and these healthy relationship workshops, according to John Yates, according to the evidence, more than 17 studies in the US, reduces youth violence by almost 20%. And the other brilliant thing about them is that they are hugely cost effective. £500,000 divided by 15,000 students is about £33 per student, which is incredible. And we've worked out that there are approximately 45,000 disadvantaged Year 9 students in London. If we reach 15,000 with £500,000, that means we just need another £1 million from other stakeholders to reach the entire cohort of Year 9s who are disadvantaged. If we want to reach the whole Year 9 cohort, we just need about £3 million. It's a real no-brainer, and that is what. So we are leading where the government have failed to lead. The government have been given this evidence. They have deliberated. They haven't acted. We're now in this pre-election period. We're hoping a new government, but also business, corporates, philanthropists listening to this or hearing about our campaign will step in and say, this is a no-brainer. We're going to back the Evening Standard, and we're going to do something about tackling violence against girls in schools.
You mentioned there the data from the Youth Endowment Fund, and when it sort of came out that these workshops were the best way or the most effective and most cost-effective way of dropping rates of violence against girls, did it surprise you that this was the best thing to do?
Well, yes and no. There are other good things to do. Therapeutic interventions are also great. But a lot of them are quite expensive. Those are more one-on-one, one-to-one. Currently schools are at their wits' end. They're having to do they're doing these special assemblies to counter the Andrew Tate effect. But an assembly, as they will themselves acknowledge, it doesn't do the job. It's a one-off. You really need to reinforce it by things like these workshops. What did surprise me, what is kind of interesting in John's research, is what doesn't work. So some of these boot camps you take kids who are convicted of a first offence or potentially at risk of, and you put them through a boot camp. Conversely, what that's been found is that actually increases the propensity for violence, bizarrely. So it has some counterintuitive effects. There were some other examples of things that don't work at all, putting more CCTV in schools. There's been a lot of research which says that schools are calling out not for more policemen in schools, but more youth workers in schools, more workshops, things like exactly what we're talking about here.
And I understand you went along to one of these workshops by the charity Tender. What comments, I suppose, that the students made, boys and girls, stood out for you most, sort of in response to what the workshop was trying to teach them?
So the interesting thing, that every group, we're funding 12 groups, they all have different approaches. Tender's approach is to sort of create, they created this, a script, if you like. This one was called Party, and it was about, which the kids read out and enacted, and it was about the kind of things that can go on at a party, the kind of pressures that young girls can be put under. And what was quite brilliant is that the children themselves start to learn the language and call out the behavior. Or that's love bombing, that's hypersexualizing, that's objectification. And with the language actually comes empowerment. So now we understand, okay, that's a red line, that's inappropriate. I've got a word for it. I've got a way of discussing it. I get the support of my colleagues. And, you get people who are quite clearly they've been introduced to some of these concepts perhaps in the home. So they might be more articulate, more voluble. And then there are others who hang back a bit. But as the sessions progress, as you have more than one session, they become more empowered, more confident. And this is what you want. You want the education to not be a vacuum that's filled by the likes of Andrew Tate on the internet, but rather through these workshops where they address these things directly.
And we've already seen, as you mentioned, one government sort of drag its feet with this suggestion of sort of holding these workshops in schools. How confident are you, David, that whoever the next new government is will pick it up, will invest in it, and will sort of make it happen, I guess, in London and elsewhere?
It's very hard to say. I can't put a percentage on how confident I am. What I will say, in a way, it's a no-brainer. Firstly, Labour have committed, and the Tories have committed, to reducing violence against women and girls. Well, you can't just say it and have no strategy. This is a very effective and very cost-effective strategy. So it's a bit of a no-brainer on that front. And then will they do it? Won't they? We've had campaigns where we have campaigned for free school meals, and a few months later Sadiq Khan has introduced free school meals across London. So we've had some great successes. We campaigned against farm food waste, and the government introduced £10 million of subsidy to help turn farm food waste into actually the farm surplus food that could go to charities. So we have had success, but it's not a given. And what we hope to do through our campaigns is to create some heat and light around an issue, to be a catalyst for further discussion at dinner parties, amongst the opinion elite, so that the wheels of change can happen and we can sort of oil them and hopefully bring about a good result.
And for you personally, David, being at the centre of this investigation and now this campaign, do you have a personal hope or aim for this campaign? Are you sort of aiming for that 17% success rate perhaps, or have you got a personal wish for it?
Yes, firstly, I'm really proud that we're tackling this issue. I think it's really timely and important. I've been running campaigns on the Standard now for about 15 years, and we've tackled violence against young people, but we've never tackled violence against girls as an issue. And it was incredible in these workshops, which we talked about last week, where we went into schools and we talked to young boys and young girls. What are they talking about when they talk about boys and girls and the adults are not in the room? And that was really poignant and really powerful. So from a personal point of view, as a journalist, when you say, oh gosh, to yourself, this is really powerful, that's a powerful feeling. And then as a campaigner, if this can help reduce violence by 17%, almost 1 in 5, that's a fantastic result. And if we can get some more funding into the space and be a first mover, that'll be also a fantastic result. You know, I would love if we could get workshops into every school. This was John Yates's dream, and he infected me, if you like. Let's get workshops into every school, every disadvantaged school in London. Let the year 9s have these workshops, and if we can, let's move them on to year 10s next year.
Let's take a quick break. In part 2, we shift our attention to something taking over the streets of London: dryrobes.
The kinds of places where I've noticed them a bit more: Waitrose, places that serve ice cream for dogs.
Now, I'm joined by commissioning editor on culture, Elle Hunt, who's been writing about the growing number of dryrobes appearing across the capital. So, Elle, you said in your article that dryrobes have morphed from a niche hobbyist's garment into a must-have item. First of all, where exactly did dryrobes come from in the first place?
So dryrobes are one particular brand of changing robes, basically these massive sort of towel-lined ponchos that people who are into outdoor kind of water sports and stuff like that have been using for a really long time. So the dryrobe was invented by a surfer who used to go out surfing as a kid, and his mum made him some sort of changing robe thing for the beach, which was made out of an old tent, I believe, and it had some towel in the middle of it. So that's kind of where the first ones came from, I think. Surfers wear them, you know, people who go wakeboarding, wild swimmers, people who live in seaside towns, and so on, which makes sense. And I'm not going to knock it because they look very cosy. They're absolutely massive. Big old hoods, great for changing under, especially if you're British and you don't want to flash people on the beach. Yeah, they're very useful. But what I have noticed is that I've been seeing more and more dryrobes in particular, the specific brand, being worn around London, far away from bodies of water by people who, I don't want to make assumptions, but I don't believe that they look like surfers to me, or that they've just come back from Polzeath. They're wearing them as kind of like just a regular coat.
That's it. I imagine they haven't just been surfing the mighty waves of the Thames.
No.
How have they become a fashion statement, do you think?
I think that it probably tracks back to lockdown, when everyone was really bored, trying to come up with new ways to have fun. And a lot of people that I know went swimming in rivers and stuff like that. Wild swimming, as I guess you call it now. Put wild in front of it, makes it a bit more smug. I personally didn't go swimming in Hackney marshes because I think I would have been quite scared of like growing a third eye or something like that, or losing a foot. But yeah, lots of people went wild swimming and things during the lockdowns, and the number of people taking up the hobby increased by a huge number,
Oh, really?
like double if not more. And I think that dryrobes first probably started to gain a bit more popularity around that time. Changing rooms were shut because of COVID regulations as well. So people were hitting up like Hampstead Heath, Beckenham Place Park, all these places with outdoor swimming, lakes, nowhere to get changed. So getting a dryrobe is a logical solution to that. It's a wearable changing room. So I think that's where more and more people started to wear them for their actual intended purpose. And then from there, it's perhaps spread outward to people who maybe don't partake in wild swimming so much.
And you mentioned at the start that they actually do look quite cosy and a good coat option. I mean, are they a strong option for a coat?
I think they definitely sort of serve the purpose. There's been a couple of times where I've been swimming in an indoor pool and walking home afterwards, and I thought, actually, maybe a dryrobe might be quite a cosy thing to wear. After the piece that I wrote, actually, I had that thought.
Typically.
Yeah.
So can you tell us, Elle, about your new theory about where you're seeing these dryrobes more often?
So I've been conducting a very scientific survey of just noticing when I walk down the street, where do I see dryrobes? So keeping an eye out around places like my local swimming pool, my local outdoor swimming lake in a park where people can do paddleboarding and things like that, a community sauna in Burgess Park. And I didn't see a single dryrobe in any of these places. The kinds of places where I've noticed them a bit more are sort of Waitrose, places that serve ice cream for dogs and even flat whites for dogs, probably, that kind of place. And they all tend to be very far away from water as well.
Pick up the Evening Standard newspaper for more news, interviews, and analysis, or head to standard.co.uk. Thanks for listening. We're back tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock.